In our last exercise, we discussed why it was a bad idea to style HTML elements directly using inline styles. It's a lot more efficient to have styles that can affect an entire page or an entire site all at once. So to introduce that concept, we're going to take a look at using the style element and move our styles into the head of our document. To do this, we're going to work with the style.htm, which is found in the 07_03 directory. And again, you can see we're sort of picking up where we left off. We have a heading 2 on the page, and currently it's using inline styling to make itself red and change its font weight to normal. So I want to move that up so that any H2s that might be on this page are affected by that, and I'm not having to do this inline styling for every single one of them. Again, we're going to do this in the head of the document. Remember, the head is where those sort of invisible things that help make the page work go, and we're going to do a style tag. So we're going to go ahead and open up a style tag, and then directly underneath that, we want to close the style tag. I definitely recommend going ahead and doing the opening and closing tags at the very beginning of this, because it's really easy to start writing your styles and then forgetting to close that style tag. So that's pretty important. So the next thing that we need to do is start writing CSS. So we're done writing HTML at this point, and inside the style tags, we're going to be writing using the CSS syntax. So here's where we have to learn a little bit about HTML syntax. So if we want to target an element on the page with CSS, we use what's known as a selector. Selectors basically tell the browser or user agent, this is the element or elements that I want to style. In the case of a heading 2, all we have to do is type in H2. So we don't need a tag around it. We don't need any angle brackets. All you do is type in the element that you're wanting to style. This is what's known as an element selector, and it's probably the most basic selector type that you'll find or encounter in CSS. After this, we're going to have a collection of properties. Now, this could be an individual property that we want to control, or it could be multiple properties. So in order to group them together, we use curly braces. So I'm going to use the curly bracket that you can find just to the right of the P key. You can see I'm opening one up. Now, with CSS syntax, it doesn't care if we write this all on one line. But in order to make it a little bit more readable for other users or the author, it's a common practice to hit return a couple of times and then close the curly bracket. You can see that brackets, my code editor, realizes what I'm doing here and goes ahead and formats that for me, which is really nice. So essentially, we have an opening curly brace and we have a closing curly brace, and that's going to enclose all of the properties that we want for this particular rule. So the selector and the properties altogether are considered a CSS rule. So now we know we want to make the color red and we want to make the font weight normal. We can actually take a look down at the inline style and use its syntax. So I can type in color and then a colon and then red and then a semicolon. So again, you can see it's exactly the same syntax we use down below for our properties and our values. Then I'm going to hit return to go down to the next line. And on the next line, I'm going to type in font weight and I'm going to set that to normal. So just the same way that we did it before. I have no idea why brackets decides to do that weird spacing, but whatever. Now I'm going to save this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the inline style down here inside the H2 element. I don't want that. So I'll save that, preview that in the browser, and I can see that I'm still getting that same styling. I'm still getting red. I'm still getting that sort of normal style, so it's not bold. That's perfect. It's working exactly the way I want it to. Now, this is a little bit more flexible and a little bit more powerful, because if I were to create a new H2, so I'm just going to copy this existing one, paste it down here, and then on the bottom one, I'm going to say something like, let's reinforce the concept, right? Global styles apply to all instances of the element. So the style that we wrote is considered to be a global style, meaning it's going to apply to every single H2 on the page. And if I switch over to my browser, I can see that that is indeed the case, because the second H2 that we applied to the page goes ahead and receives that styling as well. So this is a very generic selector. It's what we call a global selector. It's applying to everybody. With CSS, you can be a little bit more targeted if you want to. For example, if I take the first H2 right here and I apply a class of alert to that and save this, then I could come back up to the selector and I could just say dot alert. So this is what's known as a class selector. It has a period in front of it and then the value of the class attribute. So it goes down into your HTML and says, okay, I'm looking for a class. So that period indicates that it's looking for that class attribute. And then it says, I'm looking for one that has a value of alert, which would match this one. you'll notice that there's no space between the period and the text. It's just all one thing. So now if I save this and go back into the browser, you can see that the style is now only applying to the first H2. Now this is interesting because you can use classes as often as you want. So for the H1, if I wanted to, I could give it a class of alert as well, and it would receive the exact same styling, even though they're different elements in H1 and H2. However, if I want, I can make the selector even more specific. So I could come up to the selector and I could choose H2.alert, so no spacing in between them. And that's even being more specific. It's saying find an H2 that has the class of alert applied to it. So it would scan the whole page. It would look for an H2 that has a class of alert applied to it. And if I save that and test it, again, you can see it's targeting only that agent. So having the ability to control an entire page's styling in one location like we have here in the style tag is pretty powerful. A little later on, we're going to explore how you can control an entire site with one set of styles. But before we can do that, let's go over some of the basic styling properties that we can control. And we're going to start in our next exercise by exploring basic typography.